Hi everyone, welcome to Android Developer Lab Plus for the 15th of November. So we've had a bit of a break last week, but we're back this week, and it's been a mad busy week. Android 4.2 is released, and today's Hangout actually is all based around Android 4.2 and what that means to developers. So I'm Ankur Cotwell, and I'm joining from the Sydney office, and I'm joined by my colleague Tony.
Hi, everyone.
So Tony is joining us from the Hong Kong office. So, well, let's get started with this week's topic, and it is Android 4.2, which is also Jelly Bean. So usually we start these presentations with news, but we have so much news that the news became the topic for the presentation itself. All right, so Android 4.2 was released day before yesterday for those people that are in Australia. You know, time differences, it could have been yesterday for you depending on where you are. So Android 4.2 is known as Jelly Bean. The Google managed Nexus devices are starting to get OTAs, or over-the-air updates. So that includes the Google-provided Galaxy Nexuses, as well as our current generation of Nexus devices, the Nexus 4, the Nexus 7, and the Nexus 10. For those of you that were lucky enough to get through with the pre-orders, you'll get to try it out on your Nexus 4s and Nexus 10s very soon. So that's really great, and I'm sure there's a lot of people looking forward to that. One thing I wanted to point out, however, is that we have this site where you can download Nexus factory images. So a lot of people actually use this as a way to shortcut the process and update sooner. But the reason I wanted to point it out is really for our developer community, because one thing that I've found very useful to do is occasionally, if I want to go and ensure or test my apps on older releases of Android, like let's say Gingerbread or even Ice Cream Sandwich, you can go to this site and download those factory images and roll back your developer devices. So that's a good way to have, you know, a single physical device, but test across multiple versions of the Android platform. So yeah, keep it in mind as part of your developer's toolbox. All right, so Android 4.2, it is called Jelly Bean. Internally, we've the version code that we have is actually called Jelly Bean MR1, and it is API level 17. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that we have a static define for Jelly Bean MR1 is because you may have some code in your apps that you want to version gate. Now, typically we don't, you know, it's not necessarily good practice to version gate your code, but there are times when you need to, right? So if you're version gating against this version, it's android.os.build.versioncodes.jellybeanmr1. So one of the things that many developers we've encouraged in the past on ADL Plus to do is to update your app so that you're targeting the latest version of the SDK. And if you go back to our first ADL Plus, we talked about the Android manifest XML file, and really we dived quite deep into that. But one of the things we covered was how you update your app so that you're targeting the latest SDK. And that is SDK version 17. So in your user's SDK flag in your Android manifest file, you would just change that to 17. Now, there are obviously good reasons to do this. Often we enable things in newer versions of the SDK that aren't available in older versions. So for example, if you're running an old app and it's not version 11 or upwards, then you won't get the Holo theme on devices that support Holo. So it's always a good idea, and in general it's good practice to always target your SDK to the latest version. You should use the minimum SDK version or min SDK version attribute to specify how far back you want to support. And of course, there's a whole bunch of development tools like lint that'll help protect you from invoking code that isn't supported on those minimum SDK versions. So you should go ahead and do that for Jelly Bean MR1. But there are some caveats. So in API 17, if you target API 17, there are some behavioral changes that we've introduced to the platform. So for example, content providers, now when you declare them, the default value for the Android export attribute is actually false. So keep that in mind when you update to these latest versions of SDKs. We occasionally make changes like this, and this is actually quite well documented on developer.android.com. But here's a summary anyway. The other thing we've done now is when you request a permission access course location and you don't specify access find location, the accuracy that you get back of that location will always be around a city block. So in the past, even if you didn't request find locations, there were times when your accuracy could have been higher. The accuracy now will always be coarse if you haven't asked for find location. And it's really just making sure that we're consistent with the permission you're requesting. The other sort of gotchas or changes that you should look out for are that there's some settings in the settings.system class that either are read-only or have been moved to settings.global. Now, there's some good reasons for us doing this. An example of that is airplane mode, the toggling of airplane mode. Android 4.2 now has multi-user capabilities. So you can have multiple users on your Nexus 7 or your Nexus 10. And so if you share the, your tablet with a family member or a friend, you know, they basically have their own set of applications and those apps have their own set of data. So, you know, some of these settings are now going to affect users across the system itself. So they have moved. Now, with those settings, whether you target API 17 or not, on devices that are API 17 and higher, those settings will have moved. So we kind of know up basically if you are accessing those settings and trying to change them. Your app won't just start crashing, but it'll basically have no effect if you've tried to write to one of these older settings. So keep that in mind. As of Android 4.2, some of these settings have changed, and you really should follow up in the documentation as to which ones. So we've introduced something new that we call Daydream. And Daydream is really neat for users because it's like an interactive screensaver that automatically kicks in when the user has put their device in a dock or the device is idling on a charger. And the reason that it's really nice is that it's another way for you to engage with your users. It's another bit of interactivity that you can add for your app that drives users to your content. So we've obviously got your typical activities that users interact with there. We've had widgets that allow you to, again, have some dynamic content on users' home screens. We've had notifications that allow you to sort of remind users that, hey, something important has happened, and again, it's a way to engage them. Or you've used it for things like music control so that users can interact with your app without having to dive into your app. Daydream is another alternative with an interactive screensaver mode. So the picture that we have there in the top right-hand corner, it's the gallery screensaver or the picture screensaver. And so those pictures there, although they keep coming up on this particular Daydream, you as a user can actually move them around. So touching the screen doesn't boot you out of that Daydream. So to implement Daydream, you have to look at the Dream Service API. And in a lot of ways, utilizing this is similar to building activities for your apps. So you'd call set content view after you've attached to a window. And then there's a set of overrides that tell you basically the state of the dream. So on dreaming started, on dreaming stopped. You can also do other things like call set interactive to say that, yes, you have an interactive dream. It can also be a passive dream where it just as soon as the user interacts with it, it sort of gets you out of the screensaver mode. And then you can also toggle things like set screen bright. So some of these daydreams, the clock one is quite a neat one because it acts like an alarm clock. It shows you the time, but the screen is actually quite dim and dull, so that for users that have it on their bedside tables, you're not illuminating the whole room just with a daydream. So you have some control over that. Once you've actually you've built your daydream, you need to remember to declare it in your manifest. So you'd have a service, and you'd make sure that you'd added the intent filter for it as well. So those are daydreams. This one I'm really excited about because it has a lot of potential, and it's basically that we've added a set of second screen APIs. So the Nexus 4 utilizes Miracast wireless technology so that you can actually have an app running on your device but displaying on a second screen, like a TV or other devices that support the Miracast standard. Now, the interesting thing about this is you're not just limited to mirroring what is on your device. As a developer, you can use basically the presentation class and specify user interfaces on that second screen that aren't the same as what you have on your mobile device. So you can have this distinction between a passive experience and an interactive one. So if you're thinking in terms of games, you might have on your device, you might have the heads-up display. Let's say it's a racing game. You might have the heads-up display or the controls visible on the screen, but on the second screen, you may want to ditch those because then you can just watch how the race is going. And you may not even show the same perspective, where you might have the driver mode perspective or first-person mode on your mobile device. On a secondary display, it could be a more cinematic mode that sort of has the camera outside of the vehicle. So anyways, to use this API, you can use either Display Manager or Media Router classes to detect whether the device has connected to a secondary display, whether there's one available. And then you'd extend the presentation class, and then you'd construct your class, your extended class, with these display objects. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and this is really important, is that more often than not, the secondary screen will actually be a different resolution and a different size to what your mobile device is. So you shouldn't make any assumptions that your layouts need to be the same, even though they will, if you're doing the mirroring type mode, then yeah, sure. But if you're building custom displays for the second screen, you need to use the resources that are attributed to that presentation class. So within your presentation class, you'd call get context and call get resources, so that when you load resources to display, so let's say drawables, for example, that it's getting them from the right folders, whether it be XHDPI or HDPI, or even using the DP smallest width qualifiers. So you need to keep that in mind when you're working with this, that you have a different set of, you can have a different set of resources on the secondary display compared to the primary one. So really awesome stuff there. I can't wait to see what comes out of this. I'm sure this is just the start of something really big for second screen apps. The next one is actually one of my favorite new features, which are lock screen widgets. And basically what it means is that typically what we've had so far on the default launcher, I know there have been some third-party lock screen apps that could do this, but on the default launcher, you'd have the time, and then you'd have your you'd either have the slide to unlock type thing with the circle to go to camera or unlock, or even Google Now, or you'd have the entry for your password or pattern, and so on. Well, now you can actually have other widgets than just the clock there, and this is not just with this is in the default launcher, but we've added the ability for you to create your own widgets. By default, the devices will come with things like calendar. Gmail. There's also another clock widget, which is actually you can see all your international clocks. But we can't wait to see what users how they'll expand this capability. So basically, all you need to do is have a typical app widget that you've always had, and you have to add a new attribute again in the manifest, where you specify that the category of this particular widget is also on the home screen. So this is a new attribute, this widget category attribute, and if you don't have the attribute there, the default value is home screen, but the new value, and I mixed this up before, but the new value is keyguard, so that it shows up on your lock screen. Tony, was there something you were saying?
Yeah, I was adding like Gmail. We have a widget for Gmail as well.
Gmail, yes, of course.
Yeah.
I'm not too keen on showing my Gmail on my lock screen, but I'm pretty particular about security. But I can see how it would definitely be convenient. So keep that in mind as well, by the way, that when you add these widgets, you want to do it. You want to add capabilities in those widgets that are still respecting the privacy of the user. From a security point of view, it is keep in mind that if somebody steals a device that's locked by a password, that the people that have got hold of the device, they can't add widgets to the lock screen without unlocking the device first. So we've tried to be particular there, but app developers, you can show whatever you want in the view. So keep that balance in mind. Now, it's important that you specify an initial layout, and you do it again with an attribute called initial keyguard layout. And basically, this is the initial layout that's shown, and then you can update that layout as you go through. So those are lock screen widgets. Super fun, super useful. We also added multi-user support. Yay, finally! So that means now we can do things like tablet sharing between family members or friends. Now, as an app developer, you actually don't need to do anything special to have your apps work in multi-user mode. There are exceptions. If you've been sort of bending the rules and hard coding paths in your apps like /SD card and making assumptions around what directories to store data in, you're potentially adding security holes, because you could be writing now data for user 1 in an area that's globally visible even by user 2. So we've always had a set of methods that gave you access to specific storage directories. If you weren't using them before, please update your apps to use them now, because it can be seen as a potential security risk. So on internal storage, you've got things like get files dir, get cache dir, and open file output. But external storage, and often this is a really core part of it, is the get external files dir and get external storage public directory. So yeah, it's totally seamless otherwise to developers, but that's on the assumption that you've been doing the right thing. So it's worth auditing your code if you're unsure what you've done here. And of course, with every platform release, we have lots and lots of other additions. So things that we've added: right to left support in views for text rendering. In your application, you have to add an attribute called support RTL, and then you have to go and define your views accordingly as well. We've also now added something that developers have been asking for a while, which is called nested fragments. So you can now have a fragment within a fragment. To nest them, what you need to do is call this getChild fragment manager when you're doing your fragment transactions. And you can see there's some sample code there that shows you that when we go to do the transaction, the begin transaction is actually called on getChild fragment manager. And we are adding the video fragment to an existing fragment. Render script has also seen some improvements. Things like script groups, script intrinsics, and filter script. So, grouping your bits of your code in render script, we basically have continued to improve the performance and parallelism of render script, so you get some tremendous performance out of it. And we've added some new capabilities there that will make it easier for you. Of course, now that we have a new platform release, we also have some great updates to the developer tools. So now we have an awesome improvement to the layout editor that we previewed at Google I/O. But basically, as you can see from the screenshots, we have this main view open, which looks like a tablet layout. And then we've got a bunch of small thumbnails on the right. Those thumbnails are actually showing previews of that same layout on how it would be rendered on different size screens. And we've obviously got some profiles there for the Nexus 1, the Nexus S, Galaxy Nexus, Nexus 7, and just a 10-inch WXGA tablet. Excuse me. And as you make changes on your main editor there, it will automatically update the other layouts to show you in real time what those changes look like. So you don't need to toggle between them. You can see all of them at once now. This is really handy for where you're targeting multiple layouts. And I hope by now, developers, that you are targeting multiple layouts, because you know, in this day and age, if you're not doing tablet and phone layouts, these are opportunities that you're missing out on. Of course, we've added more lint rules. Lint is probably my favorite feature in the Android SDK tools. It finds all sorts of potential runtime issues, but it finds them at compile time. So it's really, really useful. We've added a bunch of new rules there, and we've also continued to increase the number of templates, app templates that we have in the SDK tools. So you're not having to write as much of that boilerplate code as you've had to in the past. We've added a new UI automated test framework. Basically, we have a viewer that allows you to scan and analyze your app's user interface, and then there's this UI automator Java library that has a set of APIs that allow you to create functional tests. Finally, we now have something that, again, developers have been asking for ages, which is a one-click SDK install package. So you can go and download this one package, and it comes with the Eclipse development environment, as well as ADT, the Android developer tools, the SDK tools, as well as an emulator image and the APIs for the latest version of Android, which of course is 4.2. The Android virtual device creation dialog has also been given a new lick of paint. It's a lot nicer to use now, yeah. So for those of you that have, go and create different combinations of AVDs to try out different layouts and so on, this is a lot nicer. So you can see right off the bat there that we can add, that we've added things like you being able to specify cameras there, turning on GPU acceleration just with that use host GPU checkbox. It's a lot nicer, a lot easier. So one of the things that we've had the users come back to us, or developers come back to us and say, hey, I've got a 4.2 device, but I can't find developer options anymore in my settings. What we're going to be doing is we're publishing an app on Google Play that enables those developer options. But basically, you can get past it by going into About Tablet or About Phone if you're on a phone, and tapping the build number. I think the magic number of times you need to tap it is 7, but after you do it 2 or 3 times, it tells you things like you're now 4 steps away, 3 steps, 2 steps, and so on, and then it magically appears. This screenshot was put together by someone on Google+, Moritz Tolksdorf, so thanks for that. So that is really just a quick rundown on all the new capabilities of the Android 4.2 platform. We're really excited because I think there's some great new capabilities here that developers can really take advantage of to provide unique and compelling user experiences. But before we go to Q&A, we should talk about something that we announced over a month ago. It was called ADL Plus Experiments, when we talked about the connectivity APIs, and we'd asked a bunch of developers to, well, all of you actually, to build us something cool to show us, utilizing those APIs, and then we were going to discuss it on a future episode of ADL Plus. Well, unfortunately, we're going to call that a failed experiment. We didn't get too much interest from developers, so we're looking at ways on how we can move forward with that program. We do think that there's some real advantages there, but we probably need a different approach. So on that note, let's move to Q&A. We've got a set of moderator questions. I'll just see who's live. We've got Lyndon and Marco live. So if you guys have questions, feel free to ask us now, and we will, after that, we'll go to moderator. So Lyndon has pasted some questions in the chat. Does the support lib provide the get child fragment manager method? So I don't know if it's specifically that method, Lyndon, but we've actually added support for nested fragments in the support library revision 11. I think you might need to, I'm not sure whether it's called exactly the same thing. It might have the word support in there somewhere, but I'll have to just look it up for you.
Yeah, so
yeah, that's cool. I can talk now as well. I'm muted. So, yeah, look, I mean, are there any quirks with that? Any sort of known oddities, I suppose, that you guys have seen already? Or is it pretty straightforward and pretty robust?
It's pretty straightforward, pretty robust. The only, I wouldn't call this a quirk, but the only gotcha that you need to be aware of, and it's the same one that's always been there, is that you don't want to be mixing support fragments and native fragments, right? So in your app, if you're using fragments, you either use support fragments throughout or you use native fragments throughout. They are different classes, so they don't just, you can't just interchange them and expect them to work.
Awesome.
Tony, sorry, mate. Were you looking to add something to that?
No, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Marco. Did you have any questions for us?
Yeah, I asked if there was any, I guess, best practices for using nested fragments. I wanted to see if there's any gotchas or anything that we should be looking out for. Like I noticed that when I had fragments in a view pager that were hosted by another fragment, I could no longer set retain instance on the child fragments.
You could no longer set. Okay, I'm not familiar with that actually, because it's such a new API. I must admit I haven't had a chance to play with the nested fragments in the support library, so I don't actually know the answer for this one off the top of my head. Tony?
So me neither, but I think we are planning. We're actually just talking about this. Actually, we will have a separate ADL plus session, actually presentations focusing on nested fragments. So so we will gather like some of our teammates like feedback and best practice, and we will present that in a more formal session in the future. So
awesome.
Yep.
Sounds good.
All right. Let me just. Sorry,
so
did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, no, just let's take a look at some of the questions asked on the moderator, maybe. So
yeah, I'll just share the window. Okay.
Okay, so the first one is Android 2.8 support IPsec VPN using PSK. I think especially is PPEP and MS Chat. But it's not in 4.x anymore. Why is it removed? Or is it possible to implement a VPN client support that? I don't think in terms of API, I don't think we have PEP and Chat in through API. But so last I checked in 4.0, we still have PSK, but not like for PEP and Chat configuration. So we need to check with the team, see whether we remove this is for security reason or for some other reason. So I guess next week we can find the answer and get back to from them. So
okay. Is it possible to use viewpager.pageTransformer with Jake Wharton's 9 old Androids library to make the animations on page views backward compatible to OS 2.1? So it seems, Marco, is this the same? Is this you or a different Marco?
No, it's me.
Okay. So I personally have not used Jake's 9-old Androids library, so I'm personally not sure about the compatibility there. I suspect he'll probably know because the view pager page transform has been around for a while, right? Tony, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Not with the view pager. No.
Okay. So we're not sure, Marco. I suspect try asking Jake. We'll try and follow up in a future episode, but we don't know right now.
Okay.
What is the feature of Android 4.2 or 3.x is the best for making static pages, not more than 5 to 7? I do not want animation. The static pages contains text of eternal truth. Okay, that's interesting. I may change the font style, but not the text content. So I think this person is just basically saying that they've got 5 to 7 pages of text. They don't want to animate from there, so I'm guessing maybe they've got like a next button and it just refreshes the screen. Is that your understanding of this question, Tony?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's lots of ways you can do this. If you're just using a single text view, you can, just listen to the button click for whatever next, or if you've got a swipe gesture, and just update the text in your text views. Alternatively, you can change the views that you show. So you may not want to reuse the text view for whatever reason, and you may have a different set of text views, so you can just hide the existing ones, show these ones. You could probably go from activity to activity and say that you explicitly don't want an activity animation. So look, there's lots of ways to do this. The animations are kind of there to give a more pleasant user experience, but if you're after something that's quite no frills and you just want to change values, lots of different ways to do it. All right, this was Marco's question around the best practices when nesting fragments within fragments, and we're going to get back to that. We'll talk about nested fragments in an upcoming episode. Okay, there's a link here to Action Quick Clock. Do you know?
Yep. So the quick clock we're referring to here is in 4.2. If you drag the notification tray down, and it's really right on top, like it's really that clock we're talking to. So and I understand Dax mentioned is not triggering the intent, but I just actually tried it myself with an intent, and it's actually launched my application properly. So it's really that clock when you drag down the notification tray is really the one on top. So that's the one we were referring to, the 4.
Okay, so Dex, I don't know if you're watching, but if you still can't get it to work, obviously Tony has a solution, so feel free to just reach out to Tony afterwards, and maybe there's something in your code or your solution that doesn't match this. Okay, when does Android start supporting the Bluetooth IMAP profile? I think the great Jelly Bean is missing it. So we typically don't talk about, we're not able to talk about features that, when we're bringing features to the platform. So the answer is really we don't know. But it's something that we can take back to our engineering team to say, hey, developers are asking for it. Any highlights on the support package revision 11? So yes, and let me just share that particular window with you. So if you just do a Google search for Android support library, this is the first hit you'll get. Support package revision 11, we've got a set of new capabilities. I already mentioned the nested fragments. There's some classes there for the view pager and some accessibility improvements as well. So here's the full list of them, and yeah, you can go through them in detail for the ones that are relevant to your app. Okay, let's go back to the questions. Last one. Tony, another VPN one?
Yeah, so it points to a link. So since VPN API is available in 4.0, can this API help making connections, or is still not is not supported in this API also? So I look at the question. So and also the API the API itself is actually helping for preparing VPN connections. I think it actually does what the phone was asking. So if not, phone ping me and we can look into this further. So I think the 4.0 API does what you're asking.
Okay, great. So well, that's the full list of questions for today. People that are watching live, if you have any more questions, please post them either in the thread or if you're live, Lyndon, Marco, if you've got any other questions, now's your chance.
Yeah, I got something. I'm working on something at the moment that's the old sort of credit card swipe view. Now, I made something similar earlier this year before I knew that Gallery was deprecated, and so I was going to go grab that code and tweak it a bit, and then saw obviously Gallery's deprecated. So I'm looking at I'm using the view pager within a view pager at the moment, because the outer sort of UI is in a view pager, so you can swipe the whole pages across. That's okay because I can push on the motion onto the inner view pager without a problem. But I'm also using that set child clipping false trick to show the neighboring items in that view pager. That Mark Murphy's got a post about it. There's a bunch of people that have done a bit of work about it. But I'm finding it's really nasty. I mean, because you end up with a view pager that's really not the full width of the screen. And when you go to the end, when you sort of motion to the end, you're getting that the glow pop up, not on the edge of the screen, but halfway in. There's also some artifacts in there if you hold your finger down and slowly do motions. I'm just wondering, do you know if there's a better trick out there that no one's been talking about?
So let me just get a better understanding, because this concept of putting a view pager within a view pager seems like it could be quite confusing to users, because if you're using in the outer view pager, you're using swipes to swipe through the outer view pager, then you suddenly end up on a specific page of that outer view pager that's now consuming those swipes. You've kind of broken the that swipe navigation.
Yeah, look, I'm aware of that, and I trialed it. Really, I think that it actually tilts the other, because they're all actually hinting by having the main navigation in a view pager, and then you hit a page and someone accidentally swipes or swipes on this inner view pager. They've just found out really obviously that is its own little motion element. So in a way that outer swiping hints to swiping anyway, and there's plenty of other room to swipe to get to the other pages. There's tabs as well, so they can click on it.
My personal preference would be that you wouldn't want to override the horizontal swipes. So Marco said it's a conflict of swipes, and I agree with that. That you probably wouldn't want to override that swiping behavior from the outer view pager to suddenly an inner one. Other things you could consider is for that inner view pager that you have now, could that instead of swiping horizontally be a vertical swipe? So horizontally is taking you across categories, and vertically is the one that you said credit cards, right? So if you've got a set of cards, instead of having them next to one another, you have them, vertically sorted. Would that be something that might be useful?
That'd sort of work until I go and chuck it in a scroll view or something like that. So I think I'm taking an app that's on iOS and it has that swipe mechanism, but it's sort of going from a dashboard into each section, and I'm trying to sort of flatten the whole navigation for Android to make it a lot quicker to get into the app, a lot more straightforward, and just sort of cutting the crap, so to speak, which is a long Australian pastime. So yeah, it seems to be working. I don't think the problem that I'm seeing is really to do with a mix-up of the motion itself. It's more, I think, that the view pager is designed to take up the full width of a page, and because of that, the stuff that you could do with gallery in terms of having multiple items seen side by side next to the one that is currently selected, it's just not as I'm not really seeing a drop-in replacement with View Pager for that kind of functionality.
Yeah, I haven't had to resort to that clipping trick that you've mentioned. The one thing I'd ask is, could you just try this for me? And I just don't know if there's a conflict there. Could you try having that inner view pager not be nested inside another view pager, and just see if those same artifacts, whether you're still seeing them? I just don't know whether, because you've got a view pager within a view pager, I don't know if there's issues coming from that, or the fact that you're using this clipping feature.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot breaking it down, and yeah, might even chuck some code up somewhere. So if you get a chance, have a look.
Sure.
Awesome.
Just seems that, like, from like a Android usability point of view, like your users might not be expecting that. The way that you're using a view pager within a view pager. I don't think I've seen it in other apps at the moment.
Yeah, I was very cautious and aware of that, and so I trialed it. And to be honest, my finding is that actually it hints more that inner view pager takes motion because people are already doing motion across the screen. Otherwise you'd have a static page that you're not doing motion on, and you'd need to have some kind of hint like, hey, you can swipe across this. But if they're swiping across things and then suddenly an inner swiper moves by itself and the whole page doesn't, it's actually sort of, I reckon honestly, it's sort of working a bit better that way. But yeah, we'll see what happens. The artifacts I don't like, so I've got to find a solution for that.
Actually, if you could also, if you're going to reach out to me with some code, if you could just take some screenshots or a small video or something just to show the artifacts, or send an APK. If it's credit card related, you might not be able to send me an APK. So
it's cards. I'm just saying the credit card thing because that's the sort of typical widget that people have seen. Google Wallet, that kind of stuff has that kind of swipey card thing. So it's a pretty common thing in mobiles these days, but just the dropping gallery for whatever reasons, it's got its own problems, but really it was able to provide that functionality a bit better on finding it.
Yeah. So the only other thing I would say, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, but because you've got this nesting within it, alternatives to that is that your top-level view pager could instead be a spinner on the action bar, which obviously acts as a drop-down, or the sliding drawer really works well because you can see all of the categories, have supporting icons as well. So you could still have the swiping left to right for the card view, but navigating across categories could be done by a spinner or a sliding drawer.
Okay, yeah.
All right, cool. All right, thanks for that. I don't see any more questions on the thread, so Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining, and hope it was informative. We'll catch you guys next time.
Thank you.
See you later.
See you.